My name is Dave Schwartz. I would Dave Sports Cards on Instagram, and I've been doing some reading. Over the last 4 months, I've read 3 rigorously reported books about the history of sports cards, from the 1860s through the early 2010s. Today's episode will be a synthesis of those 3 books, a series of book reports, if you will, that I'm calling 10 timeless lessons about the hobby, learned from 3 books about sports cards. Writing a book is hard. It takes years, and it's more labor and solitude than most people will ever know. The least we can do then is give credit to the people who wrote them. So here are the 3 books from which the 10 lessons of this episode were discovered. Number 1, Card Sharks: How Upper Deck Turned a Child's Hobby into a High-Stakes Billion-Dollar Business, by Pete Williams, 1995. Number 2, The Card: Collectors, Con Men, and the True Story of History's Most Desired Baseball Card, by Michael O'Keefe and Terry Thompson, 2007. And yes, the card they're writing about is the T206 Hannes Wagner. It's also a book about auction houses and grading companies. And number 3, Mint Condition: How Baseball Cards Became an American Obsession, by Dave Jamieson, 2010. Okay, now that we've given the proper credit, let's move forward with 10 lessons that will help us better understand this fun, crazy, borderline insane hobby. Let's take our next steps into the shallow end. Ten timeless lessons about the hobby, learned from 3 books about sports cards. Lesson number 1. The most successful dealers and companies, from a financial standpoint, are the ones who admit to themselves that different cards come and go, and ultimately don't matter. Money through sports cards is made through 3 ever-evolving fronts, and it really is just 3. The first is buyers and hobbyists who think they know what they're doing with present-day cards and think they're going to make their own money off the cards, either in the present day or decades from now. The second is card companies and dealers make their money through a drug called nostalgia. From hobbyists who are trying to capture or recapture something that may or may not have ever existed in the first place. I call these people simulacrum collectors. And the third is card companies and dealers make their money off people who collect for social reasons, either to get positive feedback from their circle of friends, like, wow, you've got a Patrick Mahomes Prism rookie, great pickup, or likes on social media, or social reasons like feeling we're part of a group. Now, in my opinion, all 3 of those motives for collecting are totally cool. Making money, nostalgia, socializing, awesome. I love all that stuff. But at the same time, all 3 of those can be exploited. Boy, let me tell you, are they ever. Lesson number 2. Over the long term, competition between card makers is always, without exception, better for continued hobby health than monopolistic conditions. Over the next 12 months or whatever, fanatics will have complete control over the basketball, baseball, and football markets thanks to exclusive licensing agreements. I know there are some people out there who are excited about this, but those people are wrong to be excited. They just are wrong. Competition breeds innovation. It sparks excellence. It weeds out complacency. History confirms all of that. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Allen and Ginter and Old Judge from the 1880s, Bowman and Topps from the early 1950s, Topps, Fleer, Donruss from the 1980s, or Upper Deck dragging everyone kicking and screaming into the future in the 1990s. Other than the dangers of overprinting, which is a separate issue stemming from greed, there has never been a time in the 160-year history of sports cards when competition has been present that, in hindsight, when it turned out poorly, it always works out better. Lesson number 3. And speaking of fanatics, we need to stop pretending that anything they're doing right now in the card space, from Fanatics Fest to fancy patches to guerrilla marketing to celebrity involvement to overprinting, we need to stop pretending that they are playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. Everything, every last thing Fanatics has done since it bought Topps a few years ago is straight out of the 1990s Upper Deck playbook. There is nothing original. Fanatics has Fanatics Fest. Upper Deck had the All-Star Fan Fest. Fanatics has the debut patch. Upper Deck created an entire division to incorporate sports memorabilia into cards. Fanatics shows up at major U.S. sporting events to host stuff inside arenas and stadiums. Upper Deck showed up at major U.S. sporting events and Canadian sporting events to host stuff inside arenas and stadiums. And before we trip all over ourselves to say Fanatics is marketing the hobby in a way nobody ever has, let's stop, because that isn't true either. Upper Deck's marketing was so good. It was so forward-thinking, so incredible, so cutting edge, that the Upper Deck logo would appear on Topps and Fleer sports cards in the backgrounds of images of athletes. Upper Deck marketing was that ubiquitous, that inescapable. It was everywhere. So you would have like a hockey card and from a different company, and on the back of the boards of the hockey boards would be the Upper Deck logo, but it wouldn't be an Upper Deck card, but you'd have the Upper Deck logo on like a Parkhurst card or something like that, because the marketing was that good. You know how Major League Baseball a few years ago got all sorts of credit for holding a game at the Field of Dreams movie site in Iowa? Upper Deck did that 30 years ago. Fanatics is just Upper Deck 2.0 with more modern technology and marketing strategies. And you can't even say Fanatics is original just because they entered the hobby space from a different market, in this case, apparel. Companies like the American Tobacco Company use sports cards to sell cigarettes. Topps used sports cards to sell candy and gum. Fanatics uses sports cards to sell clothes and its casino breaking platform. The only thing special about Fanatics is their wallet and their will to dominate. But that doesn't make them unique. Lesson number 4. Dr. James Beckett really is as honorable a man as we all think he is. In my review of the 3 books, about 700 pages of research into the history of sports cards, plus all my follow-up reading from where the books ended through today, so 2011 through 2025. In all my reading, the authors seem to draw 2 conclusions. The hobby is rooted in scandal and shadiness, and Dr. James Beckett is the antithesis of all the hobby's worst instincts. Nearly every author went out of their way to note Dr. Beckett's decisions to do things the right way. And I think that's worth acknowledging and celebrating. Lesson number 5. Unfortunately, there is only one Dr. Beckett, because over the last 160 years, one thing is clear. If you dig through all the levels of making cards and selling cards, it really is an industry rooted in scheming and corruption. And that's especially so on the secondary market once you get past the manufacturers. The ATC, Bowman, Topps, Fleer, Donruss, Upper Deck, and other companies, we might not always like them, but for the most part, they were almost always open about their true desire to make money. Yeah, the 1933 Gaudi Nap Lajoie episode was gross, and there have been other examples of deception, but mostly it's just big companies trying to make money. The secondary market, however, no matter which way one turns throughout history, it basically requires a hazmat suit to navigate. Its history is so gross. And while we might just laugh it off or romanticize it or clutch our pearls when something sketchy happens today, like someone shouting out Kurt's card care after getting a good grade on a Victor Wembanyama card, or some dude making a video that teaches card trimming. When any of this happens, it is not an outlier. This is what the hobby is. This hobby, as with so many other parts of life unrelated to sports cards, cannot and will not exist without bad actors. Let me ask you this. When you go to a card show, do you generally feel better or worse about the hobby after interacting with dealers at the show or wannabe dealers at trade nights? Do you generally feel better or worse about yourself after interacting with these people? I'm not talking about the socializing that happens at card shows or seeing cards. All that stuff is great. I'm talking about this. In general, do you mostly feel relaxed when interacting with dealers and wannabe dealers? Or do you feel something else? Lesson number 6. Grading is a joke. It really is. It's expensive and silly and unreliable and inconsistent. And from the beginning has always been a way to make corrupt cards acceptable for resale. The very first PSA graded card, the number one first ever, the alpha of all graded cards, the McNall Gretzky PSA 8 T206 Hannes Wagner, is restored. It's not suspected of being restored. There was actual testimony to that fact by people who were there. And once it went into that plastic slab, no one could ever challenge it again without cracking it out. And who is going to do that? In the early days of grading, there was this one dude who submitted cards for grading, then was brought in by the grading company to make sure the grading process of his own cards was on the up and up. But here's the thing. Grading today is also sometimes necessary if you, A, want to feel secure in your own collection, and B, want others to feel good about your cards so they might buy them. In 2025, I honestly believe, I don't know, but I believe that grading is for the most part an honest endeavor. They might not always get it right, but I trust that the process is mostly ethical, if not infuriating. There are so many bad actors out there that they made grading a necessity, which is just kind of sad. But here we are. And yeah, those slabs from the early days of grading, especially old slabs of vintage cards, yeesh, I'm not sure I'd ever crack one out. By today's standards, it might get the dreaded authentic altered treatment. Lesson number 7. Athletes seem to generally enjoy signing autographs for fans. It's flattering when a kid at a ballpark or like a longtime autograph collector at an NBA arena dangles a card out of the stands for an auto. As long as people are polite, most athletes seem to really enjoy that part of stardom, which is very, very cool. And in some ways, lovely and innocent. But signing for money, like at card shows or thousands of cards for pulled autos, anything that requires a contract, that's a different story. Athletes resent the hell out of that process. They enjoy the money, but that's it. One type of signing is emotionally transactional, and that feels good. The other is monetarily contractual. That doesn't feel good. Signing for fans, thumbs up. Signing a stack of hundreds or thousands of soulless stickers, thumbs down. Lesson number 8. Every now and then you hear chatter or debate in the community centered around who is the heart of the hobby or who is the foundation of the hobby. And some folks say collectors are the true heartbeat of the hobby, or flippers who push cards through the bloodstream of the hobby are the most essential members. But it became crystal clear through reading these books, through these histories assembled by authors who made it their life to document the hobby, that the foundation of the hobby is definitely not collectors. It's not flippers. It's not dealers or investors or distributors or retailers or anyone else. The core of the hobby, the foundation of everything, was, is, and always will be kids. When kids get into the collecting of cards, or the trading, flipping, or any other form of involvement, it secures the hobby for generations. And when kids aren't in the hobby suffers. Obviously, I'm not pushing kids to smoke, but there were 10 and 11-year-olds getting hooked on cigarettes in the early 20th century because they wanted tobacco cards and they just happened to have to buy cigarettes to get them. That's how much kids can love sports cards. Kids can lose interest in the hobby for any number of reasons. It can be because companies stop making cards en masse, like during the World Wars. It can be because professional sports leagues piss off fans, like baseball's 1994 work stoppage or the cancellation of the 2004-05 NHL season. Or it can alienate kids because the hobby gets too expensive, either because companies ask too much for cards or dealers want too much on the secondary market. Or as Bill, aka Ephus Pitch, puts it, they raise prices but not value. When you step back for a second, you can't believe it was ever an argument in the first place, that this foundation of the hobby argument was ever in dispute. Most adult collectors are either people who collected as kids and never left, or left when they reached their teen years and returned as adults. Finding an adult collector who discovered the hobby for the first time at age 42 is really rare. Pique the kids' interest, make the market fun, accessible, and even profitable, and the hobby will remain healthy. Go the other direction and create too many barriers to access, and the hobby's overall health will suffer. Lesson number 9. One thing that has always surprised me and still surprises me is how many dealers out there are buying old collections. And then you read these stories of dealers getting hotel rooms in the early 1970s and putting ads in the newspaper saying they'll be buying collections at the Holiday Inn on Thursday night from 7 to 11. And you begin to understand how they built their empires. You hear about dealers flying to Venezuela in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s to pay pennies on the dollar for Venezuelan cards that today are worth hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. And today you go to shows and dealers throw up these sometimes misleading signs about buying collections, but they're either hyper selective or offer 40 to 50% value. And again, you realize how they make good money on sports cards, which is all to say this. Dealers make their money off the mistakes, desperation, ignorance, and impatience of non-dealers. I would read a story of a dealer buying a card for well under value because the seller felt he needed to move it, then sell that card quickly for a tidy profit. And I saw myself in that story, not as the dealer, but as the desperate or impatient seller, so eager to move on to the next thing. So how do we take back the power in our own collecting? We make plans. You know your goals. Slow down. Educate yourself. Do your homework. Remember, dealers know that cards matter more to collectors than to dealers. We are not our collections, but only the dealers seem to know that. We seem to think that if we miss out on a card, that it's gone forever. And it might be, but should that matter? What if a card you wanted is gone forever? So what? Dealers know there will always be other cards, but collectors who base their self-esteem, personal identity, or social position on the status or content of their collections, they don't know that. And dealers either know we don't know that or they sense we don't know that. That's where they capture their prey and make their money. And lesson number 10, if you're willing to put in the work to become an educated consumer, to know who has your best interest at heart and who doesn't, sports cards really are a fantastic, tight-knit, supportive hobby with the sort of community that will sustain you throughout your life. Seriously, although the authors all showed how the hobby is rife with bad actors, they also acknowledge that it's populated by kind people who build lifelong friendships. A couple of the books detail collectors who talk about attending conventions with friends they'd never met before in person. And years later, they might become so close that one will attend another's funeral. There are bonds between people, tight bonds of camaraderie and friendship that could not have happened without sports cards and now extend beyond sports cards. It all starts with wanting to have a little fun by collecting cards and then injecting that fun with curiosity, education, and a willingness to look out for each other. Taking advantage of each other to make a few bucks, that's the easy way out. The question is, do we have what it takes to be better? Thank you to the authors of those books I got to read. You can find links to them in the show notes if you want to pick up one for yourself. And thank you for listening to The Shallow End. I'll talk with you again next time, whenever that may be.